And welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review for my favorite superhero role-playing game of all time, which is known as DC Adventures, aka Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition, which now they have out the book for that, Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. And essentially, to explain, the game DC Adventures, published by Green Ronin and created by Steve Kinson, is the first preview, so to speak, of Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. What actually happened was DC Comics, for their 75th anniversary, actually approached Green Ronin and asked them to create a role-playing game for DC Comics to celebrate their 75th anniversary. So it was actually one of those really cool things where DC Comics approached Green Ronin. And during the time in which the 2nd edition of Mutants and Masterminds was published, Steve Kinson, who created the game, had been keeping kind of a notebook, so to speak, of changes that he would like to make to the game if they ever came out with another edition. So when DC approached Green Ronin to create a DC role-playing game, he thought this was the perfect time, basically, to go ahead and put out the 3rd edition of Mutants and Masterminds. So essentially, DC Adventures, which this game was released first, is the exact same game as Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. So what they did is they put out a hardback book for the DC Adventures role-playing game to cover the DC universe, and a softback version of just the rules and everything you need to play Mutants and Masterminds for the 3rd edition of the world's greatest superhero role-playing game. And I'm a big fan of Mutants and Masterminds. I started playing the 2nd edition. I have a metric crap ton of 2nd edition material for the game, so I instantly made the jump. I'm a big fan of the DC universe especially as well. So I made the jump instantly pretty much when they decided to do this product. And as you can see, it's lavishly illustrated with art from the DC universe, full color pages, just a gorgeous book for the DC Adventures book. And in the back you have character write-ups for some of the most popular characters in DC, and of course my favorite here, the Batman. You know, all the big guns of DC practically are in here: Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, and some of the villains as well. So you have a pretty decent selection of villains and heroes that are written up in the back of the book for the DC universe. Whereas with Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition, once again, a full color book, beautiful artwork inside, which we've come to expect now from Green Ronin with their Mutants and Masterminds products. Got a lot of little bookmarks in here, saving spaces that I've been using a lot in our campaign here locally. But you can see just really nice artwork, full color illustrated, a gorgeous piece of art, and a nice index in the back as well for the 3rd edition Heroes Handbook. In addition, I just recently picked up the newly released DC Adventures Heroes and Villains Volume 1. They're going to be putting out 4 books basically that cover the DC universe, the heroes and the villains. This is the first book in the release, and these books have full color write-ups for the heroes and villains of the DC universe. There will literally be hundreds of write-ups for the DC universe in these books. And sorry about that momentary interruption there. Getting back to what I was talking about with heroes and villains. Each volume will cover a certain cross-section of the DC universe in terms of hero write-ups and villain write-ups. This first one covers heroes and villains A through K. So of course you're going to have Batman, Captain Atom, Darkseid, Doomsday, and all those kinds of people covered in the book. In addition, I've also picked up the Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition GM screen, which is really nice, very, very helpful. It's very well done. It's in kind of the harder, kind of cardboard, kind of the much harder kind of material. It's not like a flimsy GM screen like you sometimes get with a lot of games. And on the inside here, as you can see, there's plenty of charts and statistics and things like that that you would have, that you can use from the books. I give the GM screen very high grade. It's very sturdy. The artwork is really, really nice, and it's got all the charts and things like that that you're going to need basically for the game. Now, just a little bit of history about myself in role-playing games in terms of super games. I started out in superheroes games with the original Marvel Phase Rip TSR game, which I loved at the time. It was my favorite RPG at the time. Later on, I moved to Marvel Saga, DC Heroes by Mayfair, and then later when that game became Blood of Heroes, I picked that up as well. I have the Marvel Universe game that was self-published by Marvel Comics, and Mutants Masterminds 2nd Edition. I own Icons. I have Supers on PDF, so I have lots and lots of Supers RPGs. This game, Mutants and Masterminds 3rd Edition, aka DC Adventures, is my favorite Supers game I've ever played. They made some basic changes to the Mutants and Masterminds system that you may be familiar with from 2nd Edition. First of all, if you're not real familiar with Mutants and Masterminds, it's based on D20, but it's not really a typical D20 game. It runs off of a D20 die roll, but basically they've completely reinvented D20 from the ground up. When you create characters in this game, there are no character classes like you might be used to from like Silver Age Sentinels or games like that. You build your character yourself, and you spend points to build the character that you want to play. There's something known as a power level, and it's not really a level per se like you would have in Dungeons and Dragons, but it's basically a measure of how many points your character has to build with, and it puts caps on how high your damage ratings can be, how high you can get in certain skills, and in powers and abilities, attack bonus, it puts caps on all those things, so that if you create a party of adventurers at, say, power level 10, 150 power points, you will roughly be very balanced in terms of what your characters can do. Even though you have one character who may be like a paragon like Superman, who is invulnerable, has high levels of impervious toughness where bullets bounce off his chest and things like that. And you could have another character that's like Batman, who has no inherent powers, but relies more on gadgets and things of that nature, but roughly be very, very balanced against each other because they're built on the same power points, amount of power points, and they all obey the same caps at that power level on their abilities. And in looking at like a character right up here, this is Darkseid. He comes in at power level 16 in the book. In Mutants and Masterminds 3rd Edition, some of the changes that they made over the 2nd edition of the game is, one of the first things that they did is they changed the attributes. So now you have strength, stamina, agility, dexterity, fighting, intellect, awareness, and presence. So a few of those will be new for people that have only played the 2nd edition or the 1st edition of M&M, which the characteristics in that game were basically based off of the characteristics that you see in the typical Dungeons and Dragons games. You know, like dexterity, strength, constitution, charisma, things like that. In this game, you have the addition of agility and dexterity. Agility plays into your bonus for trying to avoid the full effect of like AoE attacks and things like that. Dexterity has more to do with like your ranged attack bonus, which you have to buy up these bonuses for the most part. Your ranged attack, your close combat attack, things like that. You have a fighting characteristic, which is a rough measure of how good of a fighter you are, how highly trained. For instance, Batman has a fighting of like 14. So he's a very highly trained martial artist, one of the best in the world. Superman, I think, has a fighting of 9, so he's not quite the fighter that Batman is. He relies more on his innate powers and his super strength and things like that. You have awareness, which does exactly what it basically sounds like. And you have presence. Presence is kind of like the kind of presence that your character has. The attention that that character demands. And like a character like Batman could use his presence to try to intimidate and things like that. Now in this game, one of the tropes of D20 that they got rid of is you don't have ability scores anymore. Now you just have the bonus. So for instance, in Dungeons and Dragons, a strength of 18 is a bonus of +4. But you never really use that characteristic score. You don't use that 18 for anything. You're only ever using the bonus, the +4 for your rolls. So Mutants and Masterminds 3rd Edition completely dumps characteristic scores and only keeps the bonuses. So for instance, Darkseid has an 18 in strength. That means he has a +18 to his strength. He has a +19 to his stamina, things of that nature. So all your ability scores are just the bonuses that you would have in D20. There's no normal characteristic scores. They've also went through, and if you're familiar with Eminem's second edition, the game had feats, which you may be used to from D20. Those have been changed now, and they're called advantages. Basically, they just changed the name. Now they're called advantages. They cleaned up the feat list a little bit, and one of the things that they did is, like, they removed, there was an ability in second edition, a feat that was called, I think it was called Mastermind, I believe, and they changed that up now. They got rid of it. So they've somewhat truncated the list of advantages, and they've updated them somewhat, and they all work really well. The advantages are really nice in this game. Skills are a little different as well. In second edition, you would get 4 ranks of a skill for 1 power point that you put into it when you build your character. In third edition, it's like 2 ranks of a skill for 1 power point. So skills are a little bit more expensive. In terms of powers, the power list has been changed up quite a bit. It's now, the way that they've organized powers, a lot of the powers are more easy to understand, and it's easier to understand how to build things with those power effects, in my opinion at least. Some powers, the costs have been adjusted somewhat based on player feedback and things, and all the years that second edition had been out. One of the big changes a lot of people have noticed is impervious toughness has changed. In third edition now, impervious toughness, basically what it is however many points you put into it, you only get half that amount of ranks in terms of how effective it is. So for instance, if I have impervious toughness 10, that means that anything that's a rank 5 or less is going to bounce right off my character instantly. I don't even have to make a toughness save. You have a dodge score for your defense, a parry score for your defense as well. Parry is how you avoid close-to-close combat attacks, you know, like hand-to-hand combat. Dodge is for dodging ranged attacks. You have a will save, fortitude save, and a toughness save. Will save is to avoid like mental attacks and things that try to take over your mind or try to force you to do things against your will. Fortitude is basically like your old Constitution kind of save to shake off the effects of disease and poisons and all kinds of other things in the game. Certain powers can target certain saves that you have, like fortitude and will, etc. And then of course you have a toughness save. When you take a hit in this game, if you don't have some kind of like impervious defense or something like that, that would automatically negate the attack, you have to make a toughness check. And depending on how badly you fail that check, you may suffer adverse conditions to your character based on that. And if you make the check, the attack has no effect on you whatsoever. There's also complications in the game, which are things that you might take for your character that you're required to take at least a couple. They're basically like drawbacks that your character has, things that make life a little bit more challenging for the character and that can be exploited by the GM so that you can earn hero points. And hero points you can use to do like a plethora of all kinds of really cool effects in the game to make your character more powerful or to be able to do extra things above and beyond your normal range of abilities. So for instance, like Batman has complications like flashbacks. He has flashbacks about the murdering of his family. He has a complication called Nemesis. He has Nemesis as the Joker. Things of that nature that the GM can use for plot hooks and things like that. Extra effort is still in the game. If you're familiar with extra effort from second edition, that's still a part of the game, where you can push your character beyond his normal capabilities for a limited amount of time. And when you do that, you usually take a level of fatigue afterwards, unless you spend a hero point to negate that fatigue. Good example is Superman. You know, pushes his strength sometimes past its normal limits to do something incredible. He's pushing himself to his absolute max. That's what extra effort does in the game. One of the other big things that they changed in 3rd edition that I'm a really big fan of is, if you're familiar with DC Heroes by Mayfair, which was one of the best superhero games ever made in my opinion, there was a chart in the book, a measurements table, so to speak. In all the characters' abilities, you would have so many APs and strength, so many APs and dexterity and things like that. And you could actually look on a chart and you could determine things very easily, like how much weight could Superman lift,